Hello, I'm Ariam, and this is my reading vlog for Adventure in Aeldia of June 2025. So if you don't know, Adventure in Aeldia is this year-long readathon where every month you get a different prompt for this adventure your character is in. And you have all these different ways you can go, and sometimes it goes straight, but sometimes it also splits apart, so you can have two different prompts that you can choose between. So I have two different characters, and they're technically in two different ways. So they have two different prompts, but I like to pretend in my mind that they're doing this together. So my TBR for this vlog is one book I have to read. They're stuck in a maze, so to get out of this maze, I have to read a book that's over 500 pages, and there are traps in the maze, so to get out of the traps, to solve the traps, I have to read a book that is a mystery. So I've already started reading the book over 500 pages, and that is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. So this is a retelling of David Copperfield that happens in West Virginia or Virginia, which are two of the poorest states in the U.S. And in the modern day, well, kind of the modern day. Right now, I am 25 minutes into the book, which is 2%, and it is the 90s when our main character is a kid. He's around 10, I'd guess, somewhere between 7 and 10. So far, like I said, I'm only 2% into it, but that is 25 minutes, and I am enjoying it. One of the reasons that I chose an audiobook is because I really wanted to hear the accent. I love it when you have audiobooks that you can get the accent of the character from, and I think that the reader is doing a really good job with that. And besides that, it's so far just setting up the world, and I'm really enjoying it. So I'm quite tired, but I do want to update you on Demon Copperhead before Shavuot. So I listened to 3 hours of it, and I am quite enjoying the fact that it's written first person and the accent, like as I predicted. And also, I'm not sure the right word for it is enjoying it, because there's some really awful things happening in it. There's on-screen physical abuse, neglect, kids taking drugs, but I do think the writing is very good. I really like the writing. However, I'm not sure what this book is trying to say. Like, that's one of the reasons I don't like reading big books, is I almost always feel they can be condensed down and say what they're trying to say in less. And so I've listened to 3 hours out of 21 hours, which is 7%. Yes, in a normal book, at 7%, I wouldn't be able to know what the book is trying to say, but also I listened to 3 hours, so I feel like I should already have a good idea of what the book is trying to say. Like, it's battling in my mind. On one hand, 7%, I'm still at the beginning. At the other hand, 3 hours. That is, I mean, I don't know, let's say they read 30 pages in an hour, so 90 pages. That's not a ton, but it's not a lot. I feel like it should definitely have the beginning of of whatever they're trying to say, and I don't feel like I'm having it. So, it is June 4th, and I finished Orleans today. I read not today, yesterday. I finished Orleans yesterday, and I didn't have time to update you, so I'm updating you today. So I read yesterday's last 102 pages, and I had a book like this recently where I like the book, and then the ending, it fit the book. I understand why it went there, but I still personally didn't like it. This one is for different reasons. But it's still because of, for both of them, it's, because of, how I think the world should work. Or rather, not how I think the world should work, but what I would like the world to be and how I would like books to reflect that. In this case, while I could really see why it ended this way, and I remember last time I updated you, I said that I could see where Fenn's story was going, but I couldn't see where Daniel's story was going. And so, very much during the last 102 pages that I read, I saw where Daniel's story would be going, and it made sense. It wouldn't have made sense any other way in a book of this length that is not a series. And honestly, it would have to be a kind of a weird series to only continue Daniel's stories and not Fenn's story, because Fenn's stories, or it could have continued Fenn's story, but I like that the book ended here. I like that it ended where it did with Daniel's story, and that it ended Fenn's story here. However, what I didn't like about the ending is that it was so pessimistic. I don't know how to explain it, because I would be huge spoilers to say exactly what I didn't like about the ending, but there was just one thing about the ending that was super pessimistic. Everything else was, well, it wasn't optimistic. It was, maybe you could say that there was hope, but that part of the ending was just like known. And so I didn't like that. So yeah. Okay, now I'm just gonna give like a little full review of the book. So one of the things that really bothered me, that I kept on trying to remember, okay, this book was written in 2013, is the science of vaccines. And that is a thing about reading books that have vaccines in them after Corona. Corona, and also generally, things have changed a lot in vaccine and how you make vaccines since 2013. I feel like not always, but like the technology of making vaccines has developed a lot since 2013, and we all learned about how the technology developed back in 2020. So there were, so to me, like when I read this book, there were like things that were like, really? It's already 2056 and they're only here? And the thing is that you have to remember it was written in 2013. And this is kind of interesting, because if this were a book written in the 50s, like, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s even, so you read it and like you get to technology that is kind of behind where we are today, but in front of where they were then. And because it's so long ago, well, and also maybe this changes if you were alive then, okay? I don't know. If you were alive then and it was like the technology is only a few years in front of what it says then, but like, but they make it seem like it's going to be very far in the future, maybe it annoys you. It does annoy me sometimes, like when it's very absurd. But for the most part, I'm like, oh wow, this is so cool. They really got how this technology would work. But in this book that was written in 2013, and she was very behind it, the technology happening in 2056, when this is technology that we're already ahead of what she was writing in 2025, it was annoying me. And I feel like that's so unfair to the book, that was annoying me. Like that, because it's just because of when it was written, and also if Corona hadn't happened, I wouldn't have known all this about vaccines, and I wouldn't have felt all this stuff. So yeah, so it's like that. It's something like that annoyed me about the book, and I'm trying not to let it impact my other feelings about the book, because I feel that it was genuinely unfair to feel that. So with that out of the way, in general, I did like this book. Could it have been better? Yes. It definitely could have been better. I just, like, and I think I mentioned that there were some things where the world building that really weren't explained, and that did continue on in the rest of the book, that they weren't explained till the end of the book, and the impact would have been much bigger if they had been explained earlier in the book. So that's why I felt I think that's the thing I felt that I was missing in this book. I enjoyed the adventure. I like the characters. I saw so many Goodreads people, like Goodreads reviews, complaining about the characters when I went and looked at their reviews. I love them. I felt that I really felt who they were and why they were making their choices, our main characters. But that's what I think that's what was missing for me. I like the plot, I like the characters, but I didn't feel enough impact, because while the world building was good, it wasn't explained in a way that could have made impact. It needed to be explained a little bit before, instead of while the stuff was going on. But overall, I like the book, and I think I would recommend it. Cat, come here. Come here. Okay, so it is March 8th, and I listened to some more of Demon Copperhead today, and I am now 13 hours and 42 minutes in, which is 65%. And, um, oh, so I'm still really enjoying it, and one thing I want to say is that now I finally was like at 55%. I finally really get what the book wants to say, but I'm not mad about it happening only in 55%, because realizing what the book wants to say, I can look back now and see, oh, that's what it was talking about. Just like, not a failure, but I didn't understand because this is just not a topic that is really relevant to me, and I hope that it will not be relevant to me in God's will. Uh, but what this book really wants to talk about is the opioid crisis and opium addiction, and addiction in general, but particularly to opioids, and how drug companies were, how do you say Rashlan in English? How drug companies basically like ignored all the signs that said this is a horribly addictive drug in order to prescribe it. And it really reminds me of something that I saw recently, actually. Small tangent, but I feel like it is relevant. So I recently saw this internet thing where someone was writing, oh, people get really silly about the Victorian age, and they like take all these stereotypes and they make them really crazy, and they talk about the people as if they were totally different. And one of the things they said is that they talk about people like using cocaine and stuff for medicine, and it wasn't necessarily because they didn't know the bad effects, it was just because it was the best they had. And I just, I didn't want to reply to it, but if I had replied to it, I would have pointed out that what they said about cocaine is exactly what opium is nowadays. We found this wonderful drug. Drug companies ignored the bad effects in order to sell it, and by the time that came out into the open, for some people it was too late, but for other people, even though it wasn't too late, for one reason or another, drug companies continued to sell it. And I guess part of that is because it is such a good painkiller. It works so well as a painkiller, and it is the best painkiller we have nowadays, that despite the dangers, doctors continue to prescribe it. And I definitely think, look, I'm not enough knowledgeable about this, but from what I've been told by people working in the US as nurses, it is, opioids are still often overprescribed. What was I saying? Yes. So I am also, but besides now that I know what the book is about, I am just, and I really like the details in this book. Like, this could be shorter without all those details, but I actually feel that in this case, the details really add to this book, and it really, like, there was just this one line that I heard recently because I'm listening to it as an audiobook, and it was kind of a repetition of an earlier line, and she does it a lot. Sometimes she does it too much, like it will be really close together, but in this case it harkened back to a earlier part of the book, and I really felt that was good, that it really tied it together. Of course, you do have to remember, and I'm sure there's stuff that I've missed, but I really like that. And I also said that just really like the way Demon thinks. And one of the things I forgot to say last time is the way he talks about what he's going through, and specifically, he bounces through a lot of foster homes, and he talks about change when this teacher is like, you need to stop thinking of yourself as dumb, these are all the ways you're smart, and he's like, yeah, that's great and all, to himself, obviously, he doesn't say that to an adult. He's like, yeah, that's great and all, but this is the one thing that's stable in my life, that I can think of myself as dumb. And even for kids who aren't bouncing around foster homes, I think that can be really true, that exactly a negative self-view is the thing that's stable in their life. Anyways, I'm really enjoying this book. Okay, it is June 11th. I listened to a bunch more of the book today. I now have exactly 3 hours left. And I don't really think I have much to say. And I think that's because the book is not really giving anything. I said last time that I'm like liking that it's 8 hours. I mean, not 8 hours. It's way longer than 8 hours. It's 21 hours over 500 pages. And I changed my mind. At that point, yes, it was good 5 hours ago, I think it was, in the reading, 5 or 6 hours ago of what I was listening to, then yeah, I kind of understood what was being dragged out. But at this point, I really don't. It's like, keeps on going, like, again, I'm not really getting what story she's wanting to tell. Like, I got that story, and now I am finding it interesting because it's a topic that I personally don't know a lot about, and it's also something I'm studying right now for tests. For a test, specifically opiates and how they affect your brain and how that affects the body. So I'm finding it interesting. However, this does feel like a very basic book. Like, if I knew anything about opioids, I don't know. If I knew anything about opioids, I would find this book so boring. Because at this point, it's just like telling me this is how you recover, this is how you get addicted, and this is what happens when you get addicted, and this is what happens when you get addicted, and this is what happens when you get addicted, and this is what happens when you get addicted, and this is how you recover, and this is how you fall back into getting addicted, and this is how you recover, and this is how you fall back to getting addicted. And it's like, enough. I got the point. Don't like this update, because the thing is, while I'm criticizing the book like this, I am enjoying the book. Like I said, it's new and interesting to me. So, like, I kind of feel like, why am I criticizing this book that I am honestly really enjoying? I don't want to stop reading it. Like, my criticism sounds like I want to stop reading it, I want to DNF it, but I don't. Right now I'm enjoying the book, but at the same time, I guess you could say that my enjoyment level is not matching where I know the literary worth of this book is. I think the literary worth of this book is far below my enjoyment level, but not in the usual way. Like, usually it's like you read something that's kind of like, it's just like, it's candy. Is this nutritious? No. But is it going to make you feel like amazing? Yes. And that's not what this book is. This book is more like trying something new for the first time that isn't very good, but you're like still enjoying it. Maybe for the novelty, maybe you'll want to try it again, you're not sure yet. It's a new food that is not like the best food you've ever had. It's not even a very good food, but you're enjoying it right now. Is it for the novelty, or are you going to enjoy more foods like this? You're not sure yet. You'll have to try it again after the novelty wears off. So yeah, that's what this book is like. Hello, it is June 15th, and I finished Demon Copperhead earlier today. It was honestly quite sudden. I had like an hour and a half left, and I was just listening to it as I saw it on 1.5 speed. And I just came to the end, and it was quite sudden. The last part of the book was really sped up. There were 3.5 years all stuffed together. I don't know if you could tell, but I didn't really like the ending. Now, it's not only because of the ending. I did enjoy this book. Overall, I enjoyed this book. Did I hate the ending and the romance that happened in the ending? Yes, absolutely. One of my worst romance tropes it had in the ending. But overall, I liked the book. It was fine. I don't know. I'm not unhappy about reading it. Like, I feel like usually if I read a 500.5 page book and I was like, it was fine, I would be kind of mad because I spent 21 hours reading that. Well, a little less because of the 1.5 listening speed, but you get it, right? But I'm not unhappy I read it. It was extremely interesting to me because I really liked learning about opioids, besides being relevant to the test I'm supposed to take in a month, ish. I do think it's extremely interesting. I just don't think it was an amazingly written book, and if it weren't a topic that I were super interested in, I wouldn't have enjoyed it. So, like, while I enjoyed it, like, I don't recommend it. Anyways, that's all, and I'll move on to some mystery at some point, hopefully. I'm still not sure whether I'm planning to read The Barrister and the Letter of Mark or the other one that I may or may not take out, that I may or may not read. Yeah. So this book, the prompt for this was a mystery, and this is a historical mystery. It is by Todd M. Johnson, and it basically from what I know from the summary, the plot is that we have this guy who has a letter of marque. He's a privateer. Basically, that means that he can be a pirate for his country. He can basically, Britain rules over a lot of colonial stuff, and if anyone breaks the law, generally French or Spanish ships, he can board them and get their stuff and take them to England. Breaks the English law. And his letter of marque disappears, and he is arrested as a pirate instead of a privateer. And our main character is the barrister who is prosecuting. Now, I'm 37 pages into this, which is not a lot. This is 410 pages around, 409, something like that. Well, actually it starts at page 6, so I'm 31 pages into it, which is even less. But I was really nervous about the mystery. Like, it doesn't sound super interesting. I think the reason I put it on my TBR is because it's a historical mystery, and something that I do want to read more of are mysteries and adult historical fiction. So I think that's why I put it on my TBR. But it does sound kind of like something that isn't the most interesting, so I was wondering how I would make it interesting. And so far, he definitely has made this mystery of this guy being accused as a pirate when he's a really privateer very important to us. He definitely knows how to play on the heartstrings. However, I am a bit worried about how this book is going to go. Like I said, I'm only 31 pages into it, and we are jumping all over the place. That bit that I mentioned, that's the plot that's written on the back, it's only been one small part. It's not even been a full chapter. I just read 2 chapters, and that was part of chapter 1. It wasn't even the whole chapter, plus there was a prologue. And I think some of it is he's trying to kind of copy real novels that were written at the time, or maybe not specifically at the time, but in the 19th century. This happens in 1818, sorry, where they would like introduce characters very slowly and just show you their whole lives. However, that is not something that I like personally. I don't like it in novels from the past. I don't like it in novels nowadays. That's not really something I like, so we'll see how it goes, though. Hello, it is June 18th, and I'm here to tell you that I DNF'd another book. So yesterday I read some more, I read around page 86 or something like that, of The Barrister's Letter of Marque, and there were just some things that were throwing me off. Particularly the fact that all the villains were fat or disabled, stuff like that. And I went to look at the reviews on Goodreads, and all of the reviews, from the ones that really liked it to the ones that didn't, they were all complaining that the real villains, the villains we had seen so far were just minor villains, but that the real villains were real historical figures. And more than that, which I already hate, I really hate having historical figures in historical fiction books unless they have either a very small part or the book is about them. So, and then these were historical figures that either weren't even alive at the time the book takes place, or they weren't in England. So, yeah, so I just decided to DNF it. Obviously, just made up what he wanted, and while it doesn't need to be some of that in historical fiction for it to be interesting, like I said, I just don't really, that's just the cherry on top. I would have DNF'd it anyways because I don't like having historical figures in my books. However, some good news. Today I started a book called Bodies from the Library 2, which is edited by Tony Medaway. And basically, there was this golden age of detective fiction in the 1910s to 1930s, and Tony Medaway collects stories and puts them from that time, lesser known stories, unpublished until now, and he puts them all into a book. So the reason I'm reading the number 2 is because my library has number 2 and number 6. So I have read 2 stories. One is actually, and I've enjoyed them both. The first one very interestingly, so it's by No Face by Christiana Brand. What's very funny and interesting is that she wrote the Nanny McPhee series, the series that got turned into the Nanny McPhee, which I read as a child. I didn't love it, but I really remember reading it because I read it after I'd seen the Nanny McPhee movies with my friend, and then we read it together, whatever. But well, I tried to have us read it together. So, but this is really funny because this story was really, really dark and adult, and I thought it was a bit choppy, but it all came together then. It really all came together at the end. Okay, and then the next story. Neither of these stories I loved, but I did enjoy both of them. So the next story is Up and Down by Peter Antony, which is actually a pseudonym for two brothers, Peter and Anthony. And I enjoyed the story. I thought it was cute. It was actually written a little after the golden age of detective fiction. They were like teenagers at the very end, I think. And so but it's the only one in the collection that's written slightly after, and it's kind of a satire of the golden age of detective fiction, but in general of the idea of having like famous detectives and stuff like that. And I thought it was funny. I thought it was a good satire, and I thought it was done well. And interesting little fun fact, as I was reading it, and then especially more so as I was reading the little biography they have at the end, I was like, are these Jewish? And then I looked it up, and yes, they were Jewish. Especially for the biographies, but I could kind of see it in the humor. Okay, so I read another two stories. The first one was Hotel Evidence by Helen Simpson, and I enjoyed it a lot less. Like, I also don't understand why it was in this collection. It wasn't a mystery at all, and I feel like that's probably one of the reasons why I enjoyed it less, because I was kept looking for the mystery. But in general, I think I just enjoyed it less because it was so much a story of its time. Like, I do want to say this. I really like the writing. However, I was enjoying the writing as I was reading it. However, the story itself, and the writing was also a product of the time, but the story itself, let me explain. So, this story was written, all the stories except one in this book are written sometime between the 1910s to the 1930s. So, the story takes place when there's a no-fault divorce. And the story is basically, there's this woman who is the wife of our main character, and she wants to get a divorce because she's fallen in love with someone else, and she's like, I don't want to cheat on you, but I don't love you anymore. You don't love me anymore. Let's get a divorce. And she is kind of an awful person, so she said, as you can tell, when she just like comes to her husband and is like, let's get a divorce because I basically want to marry someone else. But she basically says, because there's no fault divorce, we're going to have to pretend that you have done infidelity, and to do that you've cheated on me, and to do that we need to make it look like you cheated. So he goes and moves to this boarding house, and then basically he kind of gets together with this prostitute, and they just live together, pretend that they're husband and wife, because he needs some proof that he's cheated. And then he leaves, and because he's super, super nice, all of the workers in this boarding house love him. So when it comes time to go to the divorce courts, they all lie and say that they don't recognize him. And that's where the story ends. And I think we were supposed to feel like triumphant, like, yay, this guy, our main character, his wife is so awful, he isn't forced to get a divorce. But the thing is, looking at it from a modern perspective, 100 years later, it seems stupid. Like, so first of all, this guy does not love his wife. It is very clear in the whole story that he doesn't love his wife at all, and he would be quite happy to get a divorce from her. Well, the wife is kind of awful. They're not bad people. They're just hate each other, which is what a no-fault divorce is for. And the story actually gives good reasons why he should get a divorce. He's paying for his wife because, he's a man and it's the 1920s, 1930s, 1910s, whatever. And so he's paying extra because he's married to her. Like, just from a modern perspective, looking at it, it seems so weird. And also, I do not understand why it was in this book, because it's not a mystery. In general, also, the last story, the one that I read that was a satire, while I understand why it was in this book, I do think the editor should have put it later. Just like, here, you've read all of these book stories from the Golden Age, and here's one that's a satire of them. Well, I don't know why he put it so early. Anyways, the second story I read was actually a novelette. It was like 77 pages, and that one I liked a lot more. It was also written by two people, Hugh Patrick, who were Richard Webb and Howard Wheeler, who the editor implies that they were partners in a romantic sense, but he's very clear on it. Anyways, so this story, I liked it until the end, and again, I felt it was the sensibilities of the time. But I really like the story, except for the romantic part. The romantic part is not super strong, thank God, because we don't need it. It's 77 pages. However, the man our main character gets within the end, is such a sleaze. I feel like very much in the modern day, we would go for the other one, and I feel like that's extremely modern. Like 20 years ago, early 2000s, she would be going with the sleaze, and it's or some sort of, or not, maybe not exactly as sleazy as he is, but anyways, that story, did I say what it's called? No, it's called Exit Before Midnight, and it's a locked room murder mystery, kind of like, what's it called? The Agatha Christie mystery where they're all locked on an island. However, I liked it better. I'm gonna admit it. That was not my favorite mystery. Like, I understand why it inspired so many stuff because of the concept is crazy, being locked in a place while people are being killed off one by one. However, I think there are a lot better stories that took that concept and ran with it and did it better than Agatha Christie. Like almost the opposite of the Hunger Games, where so many stories looked at the Hunger Games and ran with it and made it worse. Not that I think all but whatever that story was called was terrible. Like, I thought it was just a medium story, and I think that a lot of the stories I've read that have been based off it are better. I don't think it was bad. Like, I think Divergent is bad. I think it was. I just think a lot of the stories that take that same idea are done better, and I think that this was one of them. I had a lot of fun reading it, and I was very much like glued to the page. Oh my god, what is going to happen next? Trying to figure out who really was a murderer. I had all these ideas. It kept on changing. I think the way that the authors set up the motives was done in an interesting way. Yeah, I really like that story. I would definitely be happy to read more by those authors if that happened. Okay, so I read 3 more stories. It is now June 19th, and I want to update you. And unfortunately, I'm finding this a very mixed bag. Right now, the story quality for me has gone down. So the first one I read is one that I did enjoy. It's Room to Let by Marjorie Allingham. It is a Jack the Ripper story, which I don't love based on, like, moral grounds, but it was definitely well written. The creepiness factor, even though we knew from the very beginning, and actually it wasn't a story, it was a radio play. So the fact is that even though I was reading this without music, and even though we knew from the very beginning that the villain is going to be Jack the Ripper, and we knew exactly where he was the whole time, the creepiness factor was just so good. The next story I didn't like. It wasn't a mystery, which this is the second story that hasn't been a mystery, so it's making me think that maybe the editor just also wants to include stories that aren't mysteries for some reason. This one was called A Joke's a Joke by Jonathan Latimer. Besides not being a mystery, I also just hated it. Like, everyone in this story is awful. There's no one to cheer for. Like, yeah, there is a guy who's the villain, kind of a villain, is the worst guy possible in all of the guys. He is the worst guy of them. But, like, everyone there is awful. And it kind of needs to be because they are friends with the villain, the villain's a prankster. But, like, mean, horrible pranks. But I just didn't like it. Then the next one I read, very short Agatha Christie story. Now I was already nervous about reading an Agatha Christie because I don't like Agatha Christie. I don't know if you've noticed. I've read and I didn't like this one. It just also didn't make sense. It's called The Man Who Knew, and that's basically the whole basis of the story, that this guy just knows the whole mystery. He figures it out immediately. He figures out that he's in danger. He figures out every next step. And there's one of those things at the very end, out of the 4 things that he figures out, it's a very short story, it's 7 pages, but out of the 4 things he figures out, there's only one of them that he explains, and not only that he explains, that there's any good reason for him to have figured it out. No, it's even 5 things. Anyways, it does not matter. He does not figure, yeah, it was 4 things and he figured that out because of some, but anyways, and even then it's very tenuous, oh, I knew this because this, and it was just 7 pages. He figures out 4 things. Only one of them he has any explanation for. It's a very tenuous explanation. It was just stupid. So yeah, so far, I've liked No Face by Christiana Brand and Room to Let by Marjorie Allingham. And I enjoyed Before and After by Peter Antony. I loved Exit Before Midnight by Q Patrick. I did not like Hotel Evidence by Helen Simpson. A Joke's a Joke by Jonathan Latimer, neither of which are mysteries, or The Man Who Knew by Agatha Christie. So it is coming out that I'm enjoying the majority of the book, and I'm enjoying the mystery stories. I just don't understand why there have to be non-mystery stories. Hello, back inside, and I only read one story so far since I last updated you, but the next story is another novelette. There are 2 more novelettes in here at least. So I wanted to update you in the last story, also because I found something very interesting about it. So do you remember when I read the story where I was and then it said when I read the biographies, I kept on having the feeling that they were Jewish, and I looked it up, but also when I read the story, I was the humor kind of reminded me of Jewish humor. Now, the thing about that story is, like I said, the humor kind of reminded me of Jewish humor, and then the biographies really convinced me, but if I had looked it up just from the humor and they were not Jewish, I wouldn't have been surprised. However, this story I read was The Almost Perfect Murder Case by S.S. Van Dyne. Now, I feel like I can't really judge it as it's the kind of mystery writing that I don't like, as in the mystery already happened and it's someone telling the story. Now, the writing isn't that good, but I do feel, and Ogden Nash did not like it, but I also don't like Ogden Nash's writing, so I don't think I can go oh yay, Ogden Nash, I don't like it. So I'm going to ignore that part. But because I think there's something much more interesting to talk about here, and that is the biography of the author. And that is that he was super misogynist, apparently. I don't know exactly how misogynist. I just know that the editor said that he was against women's suffrage and that he wrote a book that was extremely misogynistic or uncomfortably misogynistic. Unfortunately, extremely misogynistic, one of those phrases. And I was anticipating it. So for the other, I just want to think the difference. The other one I was oh, I wouldn't have been, I would have, if I just read the stories and not the biographies, and then it had said in the biographies that they were Jewish, I would have been pleasantly, not surprised, but really oh, that makes sense, that fits. But if they had said they were not Jewish, I wouldn't have been super surprised. So this one, if it had said he was actually super into women's rights, I would have been surprised. And it's really interesting because the story hardly has women. It only has one woman, and she barely appears. And now, how do I explain this without spoiling? Now, first of all, there's the fact that there's only one woman, but, it's a short story and a bunch of short stories. You can definitely have plenty of short stories where there's only one person, where there's no woman, or there's only one woman and the author isn't misogynist. You can, they could even just not be putting women in because they're not even realizing that they're not having women in, which is, like, that's a different problem. They might be all for women's rights and just not realize it, or like always say a doctor is a he, and they just don't realize it, even though they're super into women's rights and they would support any woman, or they're a woman themselves even. They might even be a woman nurse. I would find it less likely that it will be a woman doctor who always says he, but it could also happen just because of not really thinking and being used to these things. However, in this specific story, the way that the woman in this story was talked about, or rather her role in the story, because she wasn't really talked about, her role in the story, I found it really interesting that I just saw her role in the story and was like, okay, this guy, if he's not sexist, it's going to surprise me. And again, it wasn't a conscious thought, but when I got to the biography, it was like, he didn't support, he was against women's suffrage, I was like, oh, I thought of that. I thought of what had been written about the woman immediately. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So basically, I'm trying to figure out how to say the role without spoiling the story, because the woman's role in this kind of the figuring out of the mystery kind of hinges of that. And I think, I guess basically is that she has no agency. Like, she just reacts passively to all the events. Like, literally the author writes more band having agency than her. And just the way he writes her, like, the way he wrote her, as I was reading the story, I was thinking, oh my god, this is bad writing. Why does she have no agency? Why is he writing her like she doesn't have any internal thoughts? And then I get to the biography and it's like, oh, he's a chauvinist. It's because it's bad writing because she's a woman and because he was a chauvinist. So I just thought that was interesting. And now I'm hoping to read the novelette, which is The Hours of Darkness by Edmund Crispin, who I believe is a more known author, because it says, there's like a sticker on the front that says, two novellas by Dorothy L. Sayers and Edmund Crispin. And I know who Dorothy L. Sayers is, obviously. So I assume Edmund Crispin is also famous. So I want to update you on the novelette I read, also around 70 pages, by Edmund Crispin, which is also a ghost name. A pen name, I mean, not a ghost name. A pen name. Influenced by the mysteries, maybe. Yeah, a lot of these authors seem to have pen names, and I don't know if it's the time that they're writing in. Like, if it was just very common for a lot of these actually seem to be 40s, 50s, rather than, he said 10s to 30s, but okay. But I don't know if it's like that was common for the time, or if that was just common for mystery novelists. At least one of them said that, the misogynist one, said that he changed his name, like had a pen name, because he didn't want to be associated with his other more serious stuff, that people didn't see it as serious, maybe. I don't know. But anyways, I did enjoy it. I just want to say something. A lot of these mysteries seem to be like kind of obviously playing on mystery tropes that are already well known, which I do find interesting. And again, I think it's because these are set maybe after, because he said the editor said in the introduction that the golden age of detective stories was like sometime in the 1910s, I forget, to 1937, and these mostly seem to be written actually in the 1950s, so I wonder if that's why. But anyways, this was not the most amazing mystery in and of itself, but I just loved the characters in here. Like, every character was so well written. And trigger warning for this one, that the author does not understand mental health at all as we would nowadays, but also, I'm not sure about the 50s. Things were weird. In the 50s, they were very different than now, but in definitions, I mean. So he gives some odd definitions that are not what we would say the definitions nowadays are. Um, not in a bad, kind of in a bad way, but not in like he's being. Anyways, does not matter because it doesn't matter. It was one line. Anyways, so I just love the characters in here. So we have quite a host of characters in here. We kind of follow our two characters, Noel and Janice, who are just a couple who happen to be in the house that the murder happens in, and our call a detective, Gervais Fenn, whom I loved. He was very obviously based on a whole host of detective characters already exist, Poirot, Wolf, all of that stuff. But he was also just himself, and I I don't know, I loved him, but I also loved all the characters. I thought that even the characters who appeared for a little bit, the author just drew their portraits really well in a really short amount of time. And there was a lot of humor in the story, which I think also helped me enjoy the characters because a lot of the humor came from the characters. And it also is one of the stories where even when we're not laughing at something the character is saying, we feel it's like we're laughing at a description of them. We still kind of feel like we're laughing with them rather than at them. So while it wasn't the greatest mystery, I love the character writing in here, and I would absolutely read from Edwin Crispin again if that happened. So it is Sunday, June 22nd, and I read one short story on Friday, and then I finished the book today. So I just want to wrap it up. So, okay. So the story I read on Friday was Chance is a Great Thing by E.C.R. Lorac. Uh, it was, so I in general, I'm a person who I really like short stories, but I find it interesting that short stories, when it comes to mysteries, are almost the opposite of books. Because, or maybe it's not the opposite. It's just that mysteries have to be built a very certain way. Now, it's not to say that you can't play around with the mystery format, and it's definitely what a lot of the stories here in this book did. However, in general, you have to have the setup of the mystery, uh, setup of the characters who are solving the mystery, and the solving of the mystery. And when it's a very, so you can't have it be too long, I feel like, or then people lose interest in solving the mystery. But if you have it too short, then you don't have time for one of those three things. And that is what the story did. It didn't actually have time for solve, and I find that a lot of the mystery short stories I don't like do that they don't have time to solve the mystery, so they just add, oh, and here's what happened, blah, 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 blah. Like, they just tell you instead of show you. So, yeah, I didn't love that story. Okay, next one is I read was The Mental Broadcast by Clayton Ralston, and I feel like I can't judge this because I didn't like it. However, it was not meant to be a mystery story. It was not even published in a mystery magazine. It was published, the author is a magician. It was published in a book, in a magazine for magicians, and it was literally just taught people, it was just a story that was a slightly funner way of teaching people how to do a magic trick. Now, if I wanted to learn a magic trick from this, I don't really think I'd be able to learn it. I did not clearly understand it. However, I am very bad at learning magic tricks in general. I'm not very good at understanding instructions. But kudos to him for finding a fun way to show, and from the biography they had of him, he really loved being a magician, and so kudos to him for doing that. I don't know what was here. In general, in this collection, I found that I didn't like the editing because there were a lot of stories in here that were not mysteries. They weren't even meant to be published as mysteries, but they were written by mystery writers. And this isn't advertised as a collection of books of stories from mystery writers. It's advertised as a collection of mysteries. Like, the subtitle is literally Lost Tales of Mystery and Suspense from the Golden Age. So yeah. Okay. Next, I read Whitecap by Ethelina White. I enjoyed it. It wasn't like, oh, amazing. It wasn't so bad. It was definitely, I also feel like when you're getting to the end, I will talk about this a little more at the end, when you get to the end of a short story collection, you often have a vibe for the stories. Now, it can be, and so this one, it was just like, it was very much like, oh, I know what the stories in the 30s are like. Maybe if I'd read this at the beginning of the collection, it would have been a little more interesting to me, but it wasn't bad. I enjoyed it. It was 3 stars. Middle of the road. Didn't hate it, for sure not. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. It wasn't like the most amazing thing. Then I read Six Pennyworth by John Rode, which was a play. And I liked it till like the last line. And then the last line kind of, like, again, it was my favorite, but I was enjoying it, and then the last line kind of ruined it for me. I didn't like it anymore. Then I read, there were 2 more. So there was The Adventure of the Dorset Squire by C.A. Allington. And this, again, wasn't a mystery. It wasn't published as a mystery. It was just written by a non-mystery story written by a mystery writer. I did enjoy it. It was very funny. And it wasn't a mystery, but I did enjoy it. And the last one was The Locked Room by Dorothy L. Sayers. Now listen, I love Dorothy L. Sayers. Everything I've read by her, I've loved. This story, I loved less. It's definitely my least liked story by her that I've ever read. It was never published before, and I kind of understand why she chose not to publish it. It wasn't one of her best stories at all. And maybe it's kind of something that happened in this book, that a lot of these stories weren't published, and maybe it was because the authors were like, oh, this isn't that good, I won't publish it, and now it's like trying to find the lost stories. So before I get into summing up this collection, overall I would like to say what I thought about it. Now, I don't regret reading this collection at all. I think for the most part, I did enjoy the stories. Like, I feel like the stories I enjoyed were good enough, and also the stories I didn't enjoy were generally very short, like 10 pages or less, at most 15 pages or less. So I was perfectly fine. Sorry about my chair, by the way. The cat scratches it, and I let him because I'm a sucker. Anyways, so I feel like for the most part, the long stories were good. I did enjoy them. I don't think there was a long story I didn't enjoy. So I really did enjoy the collection, and I would be interested in reading another collection for this editor. However, I don't think he's very good at an editor. It wouldn't be, or rather, from the series, excuse me. I said from this editor because he has 2 series, I believe. He has this series, which is mysteries, and he has another one, which is ghost stories. So I would be still interested in reading it, but I do not think he's very good as an editor. And what did I want to say about this collection? So this is obviously, these stories were all written in like the 30s to the 50s. And so obviously, I think when you're reading stories from a certain era, you're going to notice some similarities. So like one thing I really noticed was like how much there needed to be a guy and a girl that became a couple in almost like the end of every story, and how much their banter was the same. And I've seen a lot of people talking about it on BookTube recently, that, oh, enemies to lovers is so popular now, and the banter is always the same. And it's just funny to me because that was, and they're right, yeah. But I mean, I'm not into romantasy at all, but I do watch a lot of booktubers that read romantasy, and I have noticed that being said over and over again, and every book they pick up, it's enemies to lovers, enemies to lovers, enemies to lovers. And it's really funny because that was basically what was happening in this collection. Enemies to lovers, as in, you know, the cute kind of, we hate each other, but we like each other, enemies to lovers. And the banter was the same. So I found that interesting. But what I wanted to say, wait, I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I just had a cognitive psychology class, and in it, one of the things that was talked about was this concept of kibaon, which is basically because it was talking about solving problems, and basically the idea that when you solve a problem or approach a problem, when you approach a problem to solve it, you may be so rigid in your mind, not because you're so used to like solving problems of a certain sort. So like, for instance, if you if let's say you have a problem to untie knots, and every single knot you untie, or to take apart knots, and every single time you unknot is a grandmother knot, like just a regular knot, and you can easily just take it, go like that, and it goes out. And then you get to the last knot, and it's a Gordian knot. Of course, the first thing you'll try to do is go like that, and you can or you can like have a problem where you have to use where the answer to the problem is you have to use a common tool in a way that it's not common to use it, but you're so used to thinking, oh, I use this tool this way, that it's harder to solve it, even though the actual way to solve it isn't actually that hard. So that made me think of writing and this book. And so I was like saying that obviously writers read a lot and read in their and tend to read in the genre that they write for obvious reasons. Like they're not right. Most people who write are writing because they enjoy it, you know? And so that can also be like a really strong thing, but at the same time it can be a keep it on. It can stick you down because you're so used to reading all of the regular tropes that work in the genre that you feel like you have to follow the same path every time, you know? And obviously tropes don't only come from that. There's also culture. Like there were so many if you read fiction that's written in the past, especially if you read some from the same era over and over, especially if it's from the same place and culture, you will notice a lot of things that just like a lot of tropes or a lot of ideas that go over again and again and again, that are very much embedded, that very much come from the culture. Like obviously, and there's also so many other things. Like I know the publishing industry can have a very big impact on what is published, and that can have an impact on what people write. So, and then it becomes almost a circle. The publishing industry publishes these things, and then people read it, and they're like, oh, I write like this. But anyways, I just found that interesting because, as I said, in general, if you read an anthology that is like this, that it's marketed towards something pretty niche, you'll end up reading a lot of the same things, even presented in different ways. And these authors did present them in lots of different ways because, especially I think, because he said at the beginning, I'm just going by what the editor said, that the golden age of mystery and detection was from 1918 to 1937, or 1912 to 1937, something like that. However, the stories in the books were mostly from the 1930s to the 1950s they were published. So, and I did notice that a lot of the authors were playing on the tropes. So if we believe him that the golden age of detective was then, and that these are mostly at the end or after, then I would guess that a lot of the authors are playing on the tropes, like, because it was over inundated, and so, and they did present it in lots of different ways. I'm not saying it was boring. I was not bored. I didn't feel like I was reading samey. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that because it had a lot of tropes, that I don't read a lot of mystery. I don't read a lot of things that are published in the 30s to the 50s. And I think because of that, I was more able to notice the things that went over and over and over again. Can't say لحظة, that's more in English, no. And I don't know, I found that interesting. Like I said, the guy and the gal, and there were also things that surprised me. Like I was surprised. I like I know the 20s had their scandals with dresses and all that, but in general, we still see like flapper dresses and we're like, oh, that's pretty modest. But no, the dresses they were describing in these stories, no, like backless, no sleeves. And I've read other classics where that's been true, where stuff like that has been true, but I tend to read, when I read classics, I do tend to read more Victorian. So it's mostly them saying, oh, what there was in like the Regency era, when people dress like that, or towards the end of Victorian, oh my God, people are putting on lipstick. So I was surprised by that. I found that very interesting because I usually think of, people in the past as being more modest, even though I know it's not necessarily true. Look at the 1700s and how much they showed their breasts. But I don't know. I don't know exactly how to explain it. It was also kind of like the way stuff was written that was just like very where I'm the common man talking to you. We all have the same problems. We all understand each other. That was also interesting. Anyways, so to sum up for this vlog, I read Damon Copperfield by Barbara Kingsolver for a book over 500 pages, and I enjoyed it, but did not think the writing was good. And then I read Bodies from the Library 2, Stories of Mystery and Suspense from the Golden Age of Detection Fiction, which was edited by Terry Medaway, and I enjoyed the long stories, but not just short stories, and do not think the editor is very good. Anyways, now my characters are out of the maze, and they've passed all the traps. I've written that too. So, hopefully I'll see you next time.